Welcome to Wealth Well Done. Together, we'll cover a wide range of important topics surrounding money and the impact it has on our lives. From the sophisticated and highly valuable planning techniques of the ultra-wealthy to the commonly underutilized biblical teachings. Together, we'll work to improve our relationship with money and our effectiveness in stewarding it well. Here's your host, Eric Scoville.
Okay, welcome to the Wealth Well Done podcast, where we lean into the tactical, practical, and spiritual advice to help you do your wealth well done. Last week, and actually the last 2 weeks, we had on Greg and Tom from Elysium Therapeutics, where they helped us understand more of the opioid epidemic, the scale of the problem, as well as what they're doing to try to solve that problem. And the other part of that, for this being an investment-focused podcast, is the idea of understanding private equity and what investments might look like there, especially for those people who aren't as experienced or exposed to that type of investment network outside of what you would do just inside your normal stock portfolio. So we want to pick some companies that we're working with that we can highlight not only the investment, the investment thesis around them, but also some of the due diligence that we've done and helping you understand the types of opportunities that are out there when you're looking for your investments. And so back again this week is co-host Isaac Schaefer. And so we are going to be interviewing Sean Henry today, founder of FYREBX. And so today, Sean, thank you for joining us, and also future podcaster, Sean Henry.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so this is round one here. We're excited to see what you're going to do from your show standpoint. I love the idea of that. So,
yeah,
Sean,
well, thank you.
Yeah. So today, I guess, will you start by giving us a little bit of your background here as relates to fire and even a bit of how the Lord is working in your life?
So I started out, I've always been an artist, and I started out in the sign industry, moved from the sign industry into designing landscapes, swimming pools, went into the construction side of it, did that for about 25 years. In that, I was involved in doing landscaping, designing landscaping and infrastructure that would help the area around homes to make them less vulnerable to fire, and also using the water in a swimming pool to aid in fire protection around the home. And then while I was involved with all that, I also developed compressed air foam systems, mini CAFs. I've got quite a few patents in that industry, and branched as I finally I retired a little bit there. When I was 47, I sold my company and went into full-time just fuels reduction and masticating, just having fun on heavy equipment with no employees.
All right. So for those listeners who aren't from, you might have guessed that Sean is talking from California here, because people in the Midwest don't need to use their pools to fight fires. Will you help us understand fuels reduction and just what a little bit more about that industry then?
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody has seen the news. You guys have actually had the smoke from the fires that happen out here in California along the West Coast.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, it's an epidemic. I mean, there's battle on both sides. Is this just the normal cycle of weather? Is it the atmosphere is heating up? Whichever. No matter what, it's an issue. And fire needs fuel. And so fuel is your trees, your brush, your grasses. And so there's something called ladder fuels. And ladder fuels are the fuels like the grass on up to the brush and so forth that carries the fire up into the canopy of the trees. When you get fire into the canopy of the trees, you get a very unhealthy fire. You get a fire that literally, if it has wind, it can take out entire cities. And that's what's happened in the last 7 years. You've had the east side or west side of Redding, California was almost completely taken out, where we had the actual fire NATO. You had communities like Paradise, California, completely burned out. In fact, my wife's, all of her family lost all of their homes individually, and their businesses burned up. So removing fuel from a fire source is the best way to manage these fires. And so what we do now is we actually have equipment like, lawnmowers, masticators, uh, tree trimming companies. They go in basically and remove that ladder fuel. And so a healthy forest is a forest that has minimal ladder fuel and healthy trees.
Okay.
Now, Sean, when it comes to the companies that are actually doing that fuel reduction and mastication work, is that something that's subsidized by the government or larger private companies that are hiring smaller companies? What's the landscape look like there?
You have federal, state, and you have private. So on the federal side, you have the Forest Service hiring companies to do fuels mitigation, fuels reduction, and going in and removing all those ladder fuels. Logging is also a way of doing that. Select logging, going in and taking out just a little bit of the trees to thin the forest. You have the state doing it with, such as in California, CAL FIRE, where they actually will contract, and there are actually grants out there from the federal and the state for them to do fuels reduction, and that's removing the fuels in and around infrastructure, cities, towns, and so forth. And then you have the private contractor. You have the logging company, the fuels reduction company, the tree trimming company, and this is where they're actually removing the fuels around infrastructure like power lines, trees falling on the power poles, falling on the power lines, and affecting, PG&E, PG&E, that whole big fire that happened in Paradise that burned the city down. So protecting our infrastructure, removing the fuels around the cities and the populated areas and people's homes, you have state, federal, and private entities that are all involved in that.
Okay. Gotcha. And like the recent increase in forest fires, kind of as you mentioned, do you feel that it's been a lack of effort when it comes to fuels reduction? Has it just been a series of years of fluke weather events? In your estimation, what has really kind of exacerbated that problem?
Without getting political, there's a lot of things that attribute to it. One is the weather. A lot of the country's been in drought for a lot of years. You get diseased trees at that point where the bugs start to take over. You have trees dying, so you got dead. Not only do you have now ladder fuels that are carrying the flame up, now you have trees that are just dead standing trees everywhere. You see the beetle kill out throughout the forest. Really, moisture is the biggest thing. We haven't had the water, the snowpack to really have a healthy forest. And then from a management standpoint, there has been a huge, after politically, a lot of things happened with the spotted owl and those types of things where they wanted people out of the forest. They didn't want the loggers in the forest. So there's been some mismanagement of our public lands and private lands. And so we've got to maintain healthy vegetation, a healthy amount of vegetation, that whole balance of having enough there for the wildlife and to reproduce. We still need wood products. So there is a good way to do that. And I think now, one of the things that federally and statewide, what's happening is they're doing control burns like they used to. They used to do a lot of prescribed burns in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. They got away from doing that. And now, the Indians, previous to everything we were doing, they were burning. The Indians were burning the vegetation on the ground. And because they would burn, the ladder fuels wouldn't grow up high, and it wouldn't get into the tree canopy. So there is a such thing as a healthy fire. And that's a fire that kind of stays on the ground, burns the vegetation that's on the ground, and it replenishes the soil. And that's a good fire. But if we don't allow that process to happen and you get that ladder fuel too high, you're just creating, the recipe for disaster.
Gotcha.
When you talk about the increase in fires, I want to put some perspective to this, because obviously, everyone heard how bad the Canadian fires were last year. I think it's honestly loses its luster in the news anywhere that's not in the West and directly affected by it, oh great, another wildfire out west. Well, that's just normal, so it doesn't even make it very newsworthy anymore. What type of stats are there around the amount of acreage that is subjected to wildfires each year?
Well, I don't know the exact. We've had several million acres burn in one season just in California. I know some of the largest fires in California, I believe it was 2 years ago, the Dixie Fire. That was almost a million acres. It's amazing to see how big a million acres is. It burned all the way basically from Chico, California, up almost to my back door in Viola, California, around Mount Lassen National Park. So you're talking millions of acres on the West Coast. Just to give you an example of how weather affects fire, though, we sell a lot of our FYREBX product to Australia. And just a few years ago, Australia had 29 million acres burn. 29 million.
In a single year?
That 1 year.
Wow.
And this year they had like 70,000 acres because they had floods. They had record 100-year storms and rainfall. So rainfall makes a big difference. I mean, in the Midwest, if you turn off the thunderstorms in the summertime, it wouldn't take long for that grass to dry up and things, look what happened in Texas with a million acres burning in North Texas. There again, it was snowing, but the material was so dry after years of drought that a million acres took off even during a snowstorm.
I want to hit on that. I had made note to talk about that. You, when you and Matthew were talking to us, you told us about snow a fire that had basically laid dormant, and then under the snow it came back. Can you just share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, they call it a zombie fire. A zombie fire is where you have fire. Yeah, you'll have fires in the summer and the fall, and then you'll get snow, and that snowpack will be so deep, and the snow you get typically in the high country up in the mountains is a dry snow, and so for every foot you get very little amount of moisture. So it takes so many feet of snow to get enough moisture to reduce down to where it's really going to penetrate and sink into the soil and get to those areas where that fire may be burning under a stump or under some slash, or could be burning right under the duff. So they've actually had, even in Canada, after all those fires where we thought they were out, as soon as the snow was gone, there wasn't enough moisture there and very little snowpack that the fires just took off again. I even had an example where I had a little property in Montana on the Bull River, and we had done a bunch of burning in the fall. And that year we got about, 6 to 8 feet of snow, and it had piled up. And that spring it had dried up. We didn't have very much. We had very little rain that spring. And my wife yells to me and says, "Hey, that tree down the hill is fully on fire." I'm like, "What are you talking about? There's no lightning. What's going on? There's no fires around." She said, "I don't know. That tree is totally on fire." So I ran outside, went down there, and sure enough, the burn pile that I had burned in October burned down to where it was burning under the duff there. And basically we got, 4 feet of snow packed on top of that, another 4 feet just periodically. And when it all dried up, that fire just kept on going, got into that tree, and completely took off when the temperature was just right.
Crazy.
Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit more about how we currently fight fire, and so understand a little bit about hot shots and then just the idea of controlled burns as well. So can you start to help people understand how we are currently fighting fires and just the way that has progressed over the years? So
I'll speak from a West Coast side. So from California side, you have CAL FIRE, which is the state fire and forestry division. You also have BLM land. So you'd have BLM departments. We have very little BLM land in California. You have more of that in Wyoming, Nevada, areas like that, and in Oregon. Then you have the federal side, BLM, Forest Service. So each of those is an agency. And then you have the city fire department, around there. And then we also have your volunteer fire department that's tied in with the counties and so forth. And so when a fire happens, the first team that's on there, you'll have an IC, which is called an incident commander, and it'll be typically a captain of CAL FIRE or the Forest Service or another department. And basically they're in charge of calling the shots of bringing in strike teams, bringing in hot shots, bringing in air support, all those types of things. It's a very impressive. I think, we see on the news the fire and the smoke and everything that happens. And I really wish someone would really do a documentary on what CAL FIRE and the Forest Service does. They literally turn a park or a football field or some field into a city within a couple of days. They bring in showers, food, medical, all the supplies to fight that fire. There's thousands of people involved in building this city to fight this fire that they're dealing with. So in the fire department, you're going to have your hot shot crews. These are guys that are on the ground. These guys are absolute athletes. They hike just amazing amounts of miles in hot conditions, vertical, very steep terrain, dry and hot, and in a fire situation. Some of these guys will work 12, 24-hour shifts fighting these fires. They're incredible. So you have your hot shot crews, and those hot shot crews are going to be state, federal, and there's even hot shot contractors, fire contractors that get hired to fight the fire as well. So these are ground pounders. These are guys that are cutting line and laying hose lay around the fire and so forth. Then you got your dozer operators, you got your heavy equipment, and these guys are going around cutting line around the fire, and you have your air support. Then after a fire happens, you have what's called reclamation, and you got to basically put everything back together that you just tore up. All the fire lines that they put in for erosion and all that kind of stuff. So from the ignition of a fire till the end is a pretty lengthy process of rehab and putting it all back together.
So by the time a fire is started, how soon is CAL FIRE called in? Is that like, the fire? I mean, if it's 100 acres, is that CAL FIRE's getting engaged? And by the
it's if there's smoke, they're on it. Their policy now is 10 acres or less. Their whole goal is to contain that fire in 10 acres or less.
Okay.
So does it normally start with the municipality, where the municipality says, "Oh, like, hey, we see a fire over here." As soon as they see that it's above 10 acres, then they immediately call CAL FIRE or Bureau of Land Management, federal people, depending on where they're at. Is that kind of how it goes up the chain of command?
No, it would be where the fire starts is really who is in control. So if the fire starts in the city, then the city fire department would deal with that. If it moves into a bigger event, then you would see someone like CAL FIRE come in. They're gonna work together. Not just one entity is going to take control of the fire, but all of them are going to kind of team up and work together as the fire grows in size. When that fire goes from 0 to 10, and then it turns into an event where you're talking hundreds of acres, they got low humidities, high winds, high fuels, sloped country. That means that there is huge potential for this thing to grow. They're going to send that warning out there, and they're going to be calling for assets. They're going to be calling for strike teams. They're going to be calling for air support. And that's when this whole infrastructure starts to come together, where they build this fire camp, this base camp. From there, it turns into something called a complex fire. And this is where you'll have several fires that will end up burning in together. And these are these massive fires. Now, another thing that they've done, they've changed a little bit from the Forest Service side on the federal side, is they're actually, the way of thinking was, if it's a lightning strike from thunderstorms and there's a fire there, they're just going to let nature do its thing. And the problem is we've had such an unhealthy forest with dry conditions that if you just let it do its things, let it crawl and do its thing, it doesn't crawl. It turns into a monster, and you get these massive fires that end up merging together, these complex fires. So they're doing a much better job of getting air support immediately on a fire. We have, you guys remember the old fire towers where the people live up on the fire towers? I believe there's I believe there's still a few of those on the West Coast, but mostly now you have radar, satellite imagery that shows the lightning strike, and then they have visual cameras set up in a lot of areas where you have power lines, power poles, satellite stations. They got cameras everywhere, and so the second they see fire, the second they see smoke, they're calling in air support. And one thing that you guys may not realize in the Midwest, you guys get thunderstorm warnings and like tornado warnings, right? So we actually get fire warnings. We get warnings that it's dry and it's a red flag warning. So beware, there's a high threat of fire today, just like you would get a high threat of possible thunderstorms or tornadoes. So we get that warning for fires. And then when a fire happens, immediately, anyone who lives in that vicinity, when they're tied in with their cell phones and so forth, we get warnings and alerts. We have evacuation zones. It's really become, it affects everybody in the whole state. Everybody's conscious about this fire threat.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you guys are doing the when you're trying to control this and you're cutting lines, and what does that mean? Because we see guys with pickaxes and those those inverted shovels that they're seem to be digging small lines. Then you've got big dozers doing their work. So what are they doing to cut a line, and like how wide is that line typically?
So with a hand crew, that line is typically going to be about 2 feet. And they don't want the dirt piled up on the side of the fire, side of the black. So when I refer to black, that's the side that's burned. And then you have the green side that hasn't burned yet. So they're going to try to push all the debris to the green. And they don't want any piles of anything along that edge where they're cutting that line. They're going to be using Pulaskis, McLeods, fire axes, fire hose, shovels, very primitive tools that have been used for, over 100 years, but that's still what they use in these areas where, heavy equipment can't get in these areas. So they'll go in by hand. And not only will they cut that in the dirt, get the vegetation out of there, which is bare dirt, they're also going to be cutting trees and limbs and removing brush. They're again removing that fuel, that if that fuel lights up, it's not going to transfer over that line and get into the green and cross over. And then from there, you're going to have dozers. And the dozer guys are amazing. I mean, these guys, they're incredibly gifted at what they do. I mean, these guys are going up just some crazy steep, rocky, crazy terrain for hours upon end, and they're cutting line, and then they're going to also run a hose lay. So another thing that most people don't realize is there's a hose around the perimeter of an entire fire.
Wow.
Okay.
And what's the purpose of that hose?
So that they can get water from that, and they're going to be filling up a lot of their pump cans. They could be filling up snap tanks. These are tanks that are set up on the perimeter of a fire or in rural areas or areas that we don't have access to water. So they'll be filling up these little pools. They're like little doughboy pools. Remember the little pools people put in their backyard? Well, these are now snap pools. There's some other names for them. And fold a pool, and they fill them up with water from these hoses, or they have helicopters that are bringing in water and filling up these snap tanks with water from the helicopter, or they're going to have water trucks coming in, and they're going to be filling it up, and the firebox can run in there and fill them up as well.
Okay, so then how is water used between water and other suppressants? How is that used? Because we see the pictures or the videos of helicopters going around and dumping a big tank, and I don't know if that's 1,000 gallons or what's in that tank there. It seems to, obviously you can only be so controlled with that, and so I don't know how effective that is. But what are they doing from a water and a other type of suppressant?
So there's two types of things they're typically dropping. One is water. With a helicopter, you're going to be about 300 gallons. And basically, as he can do a very direct drop, just a heavy dump on an area. Maybe you have a bunch of snags and you got a column of trees or stumps that are burning. He can drop on a hot spot. He can come in and he can swing, and it's kind of like creating heavy rain over an area. It's wetting an area to cool that area and kind of slow that fire down so the crews can have time to get in there and maybe cut a line, even to protect the crews. These guys could be on a line and that fire, that threat's coming in, that helicopter come in and lay that water there to protect the guys. Another source is the more from the airplanes, the bombers. Helicopters can do it too, and that is laying products like Phos-Chek. And that's that you see on TV, these bombers come in and they lay that pink looking stuff. That's a fire retardant. And what that does is stick to the vegetation and doesn't allow it to gas off, so that it basically kind of removes one of the sources of a fire, and that fire will come to there and kind of stop. Now, it's not foolproof. None of those are foolproof, but the whole goal is to try and stop the flanks of the fire and eventually the head of the fire, so that they can stop the movement and then deal with it. You know, I've had a lot of people in developing FYREBX. It's funny because we have a lot of TikTok, social media out there, and people will say, normally we have great responses, but sometimes we have somebody that says, oh, well, you're not going to stop a forest fire with that. No kidding. You know, you don't stop a wall of fire that's coming at you as 200 miles, you know, it's 200 feet in the air, moving 50 miles an hour. Nothing stops that. So the whole way that you deal with fire, forest fire, is you got to remove the fuel. You have to remove the fuel.
Okay.
Yeah, that's crazy. You know, it's something that we're not really used to in the Midwest. And, you know, we have a very nascent understanding of what fighting a large, you know, Western wildfire looks like. I really wish somebody would have a podcast that could tell the people stories that are actually involved in these harrowing events. Somebody should do that, Sean.
Yeah, I think that someone's me. So that's perfect. I feel led. I really, really have a heart for these firefighters, these wildland firefighters. You know, these guys don't make a lot of money. And they, you know, with the Forest Service or whatever, you know, but they literally put their lives on the line. They physically are athletes. These guys are guys and girls. They're incredible what they do, hiking and digging and cutting trees down, and then the operators running the heavy equipment, the teams that are in the camp. I mean, these people work extremely, extremely hard, and a lot of them have been in some amazing life-threatening situations. And so I really, you know, when I'm out with FYREBX and I'm doing demos and we're on fires and so forth, one thing I notice is a lot of the firefighters will come over and they start telling me their stories. They tell me, oh yeah, I was on this fire and this happened, and I was over here and this happened. And I'm like, what was that like? And they start telling me. And before you know it, I forgot that I'm there at a trade show or I'm on a demo with a client. I'm hearing this guy's story and I'm just completely immersed in it. You know, I want to know more. Like this is incredible what this person does. So I thought, you know what? We need to do a podcast. We need to do a podcast, and we believe we're going to call it Wildside, and we're going to start interviewing federal, state, and private contractors that are wildland firefighters, and probably about an hour podcast where we're going to just get to know them, who they are, how they get started in this industry, what they do. But tell me the story. I want to hear that one story where it's like, you know, the old saying where there's no atheists in foxholes.
Yeah.
You know, well, when you're in a burnover situation, and for those of you that don't know what a burnover situation is, it's basically all of us that are on a fire. We carry this typically it's a blue canvas bag. It's a brick. It's fairly heavy, and it has our fire shelter in it. And we're trained basically that if we get a situation that we can't get out of the way of the fire, we can't get to the black where it already burned, or we can't get to an area that we're going to be safe, we basically have to dig in, clear out the ground around us, get in this fire shelter, hunker down, and that fire is going to burn over you.
Wow.
And in some cases, like you had when you guys remember the Colorado fire, where all those firefighters, I believe there was a movie, done about it.
Yep.
It's just horrible. I mean, these people that are fighting fires, they're away from their families for months on end. I was just on a fire yesterday, and I was telling the guy that was with me, I said, the best part about our deal is we get to go home after this fire and take a shower.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these guys are living in tents. They're doing this week in and week out, doing some of the dirtiest, hardest work, and then sleeping in a tent but it's just amazing to hear their story.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, I was watching a documentary just getting ready for this, and the guy was talking about how bad the retention is for the hot shots now. And so, and when they were talking about this, he laid out some of the things. It's extremely brutal work. It takes the high level of fitness. You have all the health concerns with this, the smoke inhalation and everything else beyond that. And then he said the problem is we're now competing with McDonald's for employees. And he said he referenced one of his crew leads that he had that left to go take a civilian job at McDonald's.
Yeah.
And he's like, how do we say you're going to go endure this brutal stuff, 2 weeks on of not seeing your family, you'll come home for a few days and go back and do it again, and you're going to endure all these conditions here. And the only way that you can continue to survive at all, especially living in California, those of us in the Midwest who don't understand how expensive it is to live there, and you have to work 1,000 hours of overtime just to pay your bills. And so that's the thing where we have this problem now where the fires are getting worse, the people willing to work them are getting fewer, and so that's where the equipment comes in. And so now, as we talk, we'll wrap this one up here, and we're going to pick up next week talking about FYREBX, talking about the inspiration for the design that you have, Sean, and then really just how FYREBX is helping equip these heroes. No hesitation around saying that, equipping these heroes with ways that they can go about combating this. So, Sean Henry, thank you very much for joining us today, and can't wait to hear more of your story next week.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you again for listening to Wealth Well Done. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player, and together we'll continue to improve our relationship with money and our effectiveness in stewarding it well.